Welcome to the Emergency Preparedness module. This is part 3 of the 5-part Orientation and Safety course. The last 2 modules focused on orientation. For the last 3, you'll learn about consumer and HCA safety. The purpose of this module is to show you how to keep the consumer and yourself safe during fires, medical emergencies, and natural disasters. Make sure you have paper and something to write with ready, as you will be asked questions throughout each section of the course. In this module, you will learn about handling emergencies. You'll learn what to do if there's a fire or natural disaster. You'll also learn what to do if a consumer has a medical emergency. Keeping consumers safe is an important part of an HCA's job. Learning how to prepare for emergencies is a great way to keep consumers safe. Now let's review the module objectives. By the end of this module, you will be able to list ways to keep the consumer and yourself safe during a fire or natural disaster. Encourage consumers to create and use an evacuation and emergency action plan. Locate a consumer's advanced directives and give them to the appropriate emergency responder. Identify whom to contact in an emergency. There are 4 lessons in this module. Lesson 1 introduces you to this module. Lesson 2 is about fire safety and what to do if there's a fire. Lesson 3 shows you how to keep yourself and the consumer safe during and after a natural disaster. Lesson 4 is about responding to medical emergencies and how and to whom they are reported. In this lesson, you will learn fire safety tips, how to use a fire extinguisher, how to create an evacuation plan, whom to contact if there is a fire, and what information to give to emergency responders. Fires are one of the most common home emergencies. According to the Red Cross, about 7 people die and 36 are injured each day as a result of a home fire. Home fires cause more than $7 billion in property damage each year. Because of the injuries and damage they can cause, it's a good idea for HCAs and consumers to know what to do if there's a fire. The best way to keep consumers safe from fires is to try to prevent fires from starting. Here are some tips for preventing fires. Does the consumer smoke? According to the U.S. Fire Administration, there are 7,600 smoking-related fires in homes each year. If the consumer smokes and has a condition like dementia that causes forgetfulness or takes medications that make them sleepy, it might not be safe to leave them. Stay with the consumer while they smoke. Does the consumer use a fireplace or wood stove for heat? Make sure the damper is open before the fireplace or stove is lit. Fireplaces should have screens to prevent sparks from landing on items that could catch fire. When disposing of ashes, make sure they are cool and put in a metal container. Keep the container away from buildings. According to the National Fire Protection Association, 32% of home fires involve space heaters and account for almost 80% of fire deaths. For this reason, it's important to be careful when using a space heater. The space heater should be on a flat, non-flammable surface such as tiles or cement. Make sure the heater is at least 3 feet away from flammable items, such as bedding, curtains, or furniture. The space heater should be off if no one is in the room. The U.S. Fire Administration estimates that almost 50% of home fires involve cooking. Make sure someone is watching food that is cooking. When finished with the stove, make sure it's off. Although the number of home fires and fatalities are down about 20% since 2011, home fires will still happen. This is why it's a good idea for everyone to have working smoke detectors in their homes. The Red Cross says that having working smoke detectors reduces the risk of dying in a fire by half. HCAs should check to see if consumers have smoke detectors installed in their homes. There should be 1 smoke detector on each floor, plus 1 outside each bedroom. If the consumer doesn't have any, suggest they get some. Smoke detectors are inexpensive and save lives. It's not enough to have a smoke detector in the home. You have to make sure it's working. Smoke detectors should be tested and batteries replaced at least twice a year. Many people check or replace their batteries when the time changes in spring and fall. It's a good idea for the consumer to have extra batteries available. It's also a good idea for consumers to have a working fire extinguisher in their homes. If a consumer doesn't have one, encourage them to get one. If a consumer does have a fire extinguisher, make sure you know where it is kept. There are different types of fire extinguishers. The type depends on what kind of fire it would be used for. A fire extinguisher that says ABC can be used on all types of fire. Recommend this type to a consumer. If you have a fire emergency while at a consumer's home, there are 4 things you should do. The first thing to do is to make sure everyone is safe. Stop what you are doing and get the consumer and yourself somewhere safe. Next, call 911. Pull the fire alarm if the consumer's building has one. If you can do it safely, close all doors and windows around the fire. This will help to trap the fire. Last, decide if you can safely use a fire extinguisher on the fire. If the fire is too large to safely use an extinguisher, evacuate the building. How do you know when to call 911 in a fire emergency? Call 911 if you or the consumer is hurt, if you see a fire, or smell smoke. Don't worry about deciding if the situation is an emergency. Emergency responders can decide if there's an emergency and tell you what to do. When you call, make sure you can briefly and clearly tell the emergency responder what is happening. Know the consumer's address and the nearest major intersection. Do not hang up. Stay on the phone with the emergency responder and follow their directions. Remember, the consumer's and your safety comes first, so don't delay in calling 911. There are 4 simple steps to follow when using a fire extinguisher. First, you'll need to pull the ring pin. This will snap the plastic seal. Next, aim the extinguisher at the base of the fire. Do not aim at the flames. Stay a safe distance from the flames so you don't get hurt. Squeeze the handles together to spray. Keep the extinguisher upright. Sweep across the flames, spraying from side to side, moving the extinguisher back and forth. Remember, if you don't think the fire will respond to a fire extinguisher or you feel unsafe, don't try to use it. Get away from the fire. This short video will show you how to use a fire extinguisher.
Hold the extinguisher upright and pull the ring back to snap the plastic seal. Aim. Stand back from the fire. Aim at the base of the fire. Squeeze. Keep the extinguisher upright and squeeze the handles together. Sweep. Sweep from side to side.
After you've put out the fire, don't leave the area until you're sure the fire is out. Once you're sure the fire won't restart, get everyone out of the area. Then, ventilate the area. After you're sure everyone is safe, you'll need to report the fire to the case manager or supervisor. Every fire must be reported, even if you put it out. Remember these fire safety tips for extinguishing fires. First, never try to take a burning object out of a room. You could be injured or spread the flames. Do not put water on an electrical fire. This could give you a shock. Do not put water on a grease fire. Water will not put out a grease fire and could cause it to spread. Instead, use baking soda or a pot lid. Did you know that when a home fire starts, you have only 2 minutes to escape? Having an evacuation plan is a good way to keep everyone safe in case of a fire. An evacuation plan doesn't have to be fancy or complicated. First, draw an outline of the consumer's home and then draw each room. If you can, find 2 ways to get out of each room and draw those on the plan. Remember, one of the ways out could be a window. If the consumer lives in an apartment, learn where the fire escape and the nearest stairs are. Never use an elevator in a fire, as the power could fail and trap you. Use arrows to show where those ways out are. Agree on a place to meet outside after a fire or natural disaster. Keep this evacuation plan with the consumer's emergency action plan. If the consumer has a disability, there are 4 evacuation options. The first is horizontal evacuation. This is when the consumer uses ground-level exits to evacuate or goes to a safe area of the home. A stairway evacuation is when the consumer uses the stairs to reach a ground-level exit. For consumers who use wheelchairs, do not attempt a stairway evacuation unless there is extreme danger. Some consumers may need to stay in place. This would mean moving to a room on the outside of the home, one with a window. There should be a phone and a fire-resistant door too. The consumer can call 911 and tell emergency responders where they are. Use this option only if there is no immediate danger. The last is using an area of refuge. This means going to a safe place within the building. The HCA then lets emergency personnel know where the consumer is. An emergency action plan is a document that lists important emergency information. It should include the consumer's name, address, phone number, and the nearest intersection. It may also contain emergency contact numbers, who you call after the emergency. It can also list where to go if the consumer's home is not safe. It should also list medical contact information. You'll learn about that later. Your employer may already have created an emergency action plan. Know where it is so you can quickly find it in an emergency. If you must evacuate the consumer's house because of a fire, take the emergency action plan with you, if you can. It will help you contact the consumer's family or friends so you can let them know what has happened. When evacuating a consumer's home, stay low to the ground. This is where there is the least smoke. Cover your mouth and nose with your shirt or a towel. Make sure the consumer's nose and mouth are covered, if possible. If you must evacuate through flames, keep low, close your eyes, put your head down, and cover your hair. Do not ever go back into a burning building to rescue pets or get valuable belongings. Stay out of the home until fire personnel tell you it is safe to return. If the consumer is unable to safely leave the home during a fire, stay with them. Remain calm. Call 911 and let them know you are trapped and where you are in the house. The greatest danger from a fire is the smoke, not the flames. Go into a room where you can close a door. The door will slow the fire. Put clothing or towels under the door and around vents to reduce exposure to smoke. The floor will be coolest and the least smoky, so stay as low as you can. Fires can be life-threatening emergencies. Knowing what to do in a fire could save the consumer's life or yours. The best way to know what to do is to practice. Know where fire extinguishers are kept. Remember the ways out of a consumer's home. Ask about an emergency action plan and review it with the consumer. Being prepared will help you stay calm and keep the consumer safe. Let's review what you learned in this lesson. List the steps of using a fire extinguisher in the correct order. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read the statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. List the steps of responding to a fire in the correct order. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read this statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. In this lesson, you learned ways to prevent fires, such as by making sure the stove is never left unattended. You learned how to make a consumer's home safer by making sure the consumer has working smoke alarms. You learned the 4 steps of responding to a fire. Make sure everyone is safe, call 911, trap the fire, and extinguish the fire or evacuate. You also learned how to use a fire extinguisher. Pull the pin, aim at the base of the flames, squeeze the handles together, and move the extinguisher from side to side. You learned how to create an evacuation plan and about emergency action plans. You also learned what to do if you're trapped by a fire. This lesson will teach you what to do if there is a natural disaster. You'll learn how to prepare for one and what to do after one happens. You'll learn what you should do during an earthquake and how to prepare for severe weather. You'll also learn how to respond to a power outage. Natural disasters happen with little or no warning. They can cause damage to a consumer's home and injure you or the consumer. Although you can't prevent a natural disaster, you can prepare for one. First, make sure you know the ways out of each room. Next, make sure you have emergency numbers near each phone. See if the consumer has a natural disaster supplies checklist, similar to the one on the screen. Finally, check to see if the consumer has an emergency action plan. This plan would list the ways out of each room and list family contact information. To be prepared for a natural disaster, the consumer should have an emergency supplies kit. An emergency supplies kit should have 3 days of food, water, and medication available. A 3-day supply of water is 3 gallons per person. If the consumer has pets, they should have a 3-day supply of food and water too. A first aid kit is another good addition to an emergency supplies kit. Knowing what to do before, during, and after an earthquake can help you keep the consumer safe. Make sure you know the ways out of a consumer's home. Think about places you could keep the consumer and yourself safe during an earthquake. Under a piece of large, heavy furniture is best. Make sure you know where the consumer keeps flashlights. Find out where the outside gas shutoff valve is. You may need to turn off the gas supply after an earthquake. During an earthquake, keep yourself safe and assist the consumer when the shaking stops. Stay inside the building. If you can, find a sturdy piece of furniture and get under it. Hold on to it until the shaking stops. If you cannot get under a piece of furniture, sit on the floor next to an interior wall. Cover your head and neck with your arms. Stay away from windows and walls with things hanging on them. The window could break and items could fall onto you, causing injury. Stay inside until the shaking stops and it is safe to leave the building. If you are in a building with sprinklers and fire alarms, an earthquake may set them off. This does not mean there is a fire. This brief video will show you what to do during an earthquake.
When you feel an earthquake, remember to drop, cover, and hold. Drop and cover yourself under a desk or table. Stay away from windows and objects like bookcases that could fall. Hold onto the desk or table. If it moves, move with it.
This brief video will show you how to keep a consumer safe during an earthquake.
If your consumer is in a wheelchair, he or she should stay in it. Move the wheelchair to safe cover. If possible, move your consumer into a doorway. Lock the wheels and tell your consumer to protect his or her head with his or her arms.
If you are outside during an earthquake, find a clear spot and get on the ground. Keep away from anything that could fall on you, such as buildings, trees, and power lines. If you are near mountains or cliffs, watch for falling rocks. Landslides can happen after an earthquake. If you are in a car during an earthquake, pull over in a clear area without buildings or power lines. Do not go under bridges or overpasses, as they could collapse onto your car. Stay inside your car until the shaking stops, and then drive carefully. Avoid bridges or ramps if they are damaged. If a power line lands on your car, stay inside the car until help arrives. After the shaking stops, make sure you and the consumer are not injured. Get out of the building once the shaking stops. Do not move someone who is injured unless there is immediate danger of further injury. For example, if the consumer's home were about to collapse. Aftershocks are common after an earthquake. During an aftershock, take cover. If the consumer lives near the ocean, listen to the radio for reports of tsunamis, which can be caused by earthquakes. Earthquakes may cause breaks in water or gas lines. If you know where to find the emergency shutoff valves, you may be able to prevent further damage to a consumer's home. If you suspect the water line is broken, shut off the water at the main valve. If you smell natural gas or hear hissing, open a window and get out of the building. Shut off the gas from the main valve outside the building. After an earthquake or any other kind of natural disaster, you should not call 911 unless there is a life-threatening injury. Phone lines may be overloaded, so by reporting only life-threatening injuries, you can help keep the lines open for those who do need to call 911. Weather events such as flooding, lightning, tornadoes, or heat can cause injury to you or a consumer. While many weather events happen quickly, some can be prepared for. Having an emergency action plan is the first step for preparing for severe weather. If you know you and the consumer will be outside, make sure you check the weather forecast. Being outside in the sun and heat can cause sunburn, dehydration, or heat stroke. Follow these tips for keeping consumers safe if they will be outside in the sun or heat. Encourage the consumer to wear sunscreen that has a protection factor of at least 30 and a hat and sunglasses. The consumer should sit in the shade if possible. To avoid dehydration, make sure the consumer drinks plenty of water. Remember that it is never safe to leave people or pets in a hot car. To know what to do in case of severe weather, first, you should know the meaning of some severe weather terms. A watch means that conditions are favorable for a severe weather event, such as severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, or flash floods. A warning means severe weather is about to happen or is happening. It's important to remember that warnings may happen only minutes before the severe weather strikes, so you must act quickly. Remember these tips for staying safe during severe weather. If you see lightning or hear thunder, go indoors. Lightning can strike well ahead of a thunderstorm, so don't wait until the storm is over you. If there's a tornado, go to an interior room with no windows on the lowest level of the building. Mobile homes are never safe in a tornado. In a flood, stay away from floodwater. As few as 6 inches of water can knock you off your feet. Do not try to drive through floodwaters, as the vehicle could be swept away. Being prepared for power outages will keep the consumer safe if one does happen. If the consumer uses life-sustaining equipment, make sure it's registered with the utility company. Keep the utility company's number near each phone and in the emergency action plan. Check if the consumer owns a generator for power. If not, encourage them to buy one. Ask if the consumer has another source of heat and enough fuel. If the consumer has an electric garage door, learn how to open it without power. During a power outage, let the consumer know what is happening and that they are safe. Find flashlights so the consumer can see. Is the consumer's home the only one without power? If so, check the fuse box or circuit breaker panel. When using candles, be careful of starting fires. Unplug computers and other items that could be damaged when the power is restored, but leave one light switch on so you know when the power returns. Keep windows and curtains closed to trap heat. If using gas or kerosene heat, be careful to have proper ventilation. Conserve water. especially if the consumer's water comes from a well. Avoid opening the refrigerator or freezer. A freezer can keep foods frozen for 2 days. It can be hard to do, but staying calm during an emergency will improve your communication and help keep others calm. Here are some ways to keep calm. First, make sure you know what to do. If there's a plan, make sure you're familiar with the steps. Knowing what to do will help keep you calm. You'll do even better if you've practiced what to do in an emergency. Figure out what is going on. Seeing the entire problem will help you decide what to do next. Focus. Think only about what you need to do to get through the emergency. Watch your emotions. Emergencies can have high emotions and can get in the way of what you need to do. Lastly, take a deep breath to calm yourself. After a fire or natural disaster, the consumer's family or friends will want to make sure the consumer is safe. Part of creating an emergency action plan is to have contact information for people the consumer wants to notify. If the consumer has a cell phone, make sure the in case of emergency contact, also known as ICE, is programmed into the phone. Sometimes after a natural disaster, the local phone lines are down. It could be easier to call someone who is in another town. Have this information ready in case of an emergency. There are several types of natural disaster that can happen. It is unlikely that you will experience one of these, but it's best to be prepared. Knowing what to do in an emergency will make it easier for you to keep the consumer and yourself safe. Let's review what you learned in this lesson. Read the statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read the statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read the statement, then decide which answers apply. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. In this lesson, you learned that there are many types of natural disaster, but the ways of planning for them are similar. Make sure the consumer has an emergency action plan that includes ways to get out of each room of their home. You learned what to include in an emergency supply kit, including 3 gallons of water per person, and how to use a disaster checklist. You learned how to take cover during an earthquake if you are inside, outside, or in a car. You learned what weather watches and warnings mean. You heard what to do if there's a power outage, and you learned how to stay calm. This lesson will teach you what to do if there's a medical emergency. You'll learn about the different types of advanced directives, such as a DNR or POLST, and how to use them in an emergency. You'll learn how and to whom to report medical emergencies, and what to do if a consumer dies. Because some consumers have certain medical conditions or may be frail, you might have to assist a consumer during a medical emergency. There are many types of medical emergencies you may see as an HCA. Here are some common ones. Falls. If a consumer falls and is injured, that is a medical emergency. You'll learn more about preventing falls in another module. Overdoses or serious medication interactions are more examples of medical emergencies. If the consumer passes out and can't be easily awakened, that is considered a medical emergency. If the consumer is having serious trouble breathing, that is a medical emergency too. In general, if a consumer has a sudden and serious change in health, it is considered a medical emergency. When a consumer has a medical emergency, your priority is getting them help. If you think the consumer's life is in danger, call 911. Remember to briefly and clearly describe the emergency and be able to give the consumer's address and phone number. Stay on the phone with the 911 operator until they tell you to disconnect. They may have instructions for you. If you work for a home care agency, your agency may have specific policies about what to do and whom to contact in an emergency. Make sure you know your agency's policy on medical emergencies. Once the consumer is safe, report the medical emergency to the case manager or supervisor. If your employer requires you to document the situation, do that too. In addition to reporting the incident to the case manager or supervisor, know ahead of time if you are expected to contact the consumer's emergency contact. You may need to contact the consumer's guardian, family, or friends. Look for contact information in the consumer's emergency action plan or care plan. After you call 911, there are some things you can do to keep the consumer safe and as comfortable as possible while you wait for emergency personnel. First, don't move the consumer. Moving the consumer could make things worse. Make the consumer as comfortable as you possibly can. Do not offer water or food, as that could cause choking. Stay with the consumer, if possible, until help arrives. An emergency action plan should include medical information. Include the consumer's primary doctor and their phone number. The pharmacist and their phone number should be on the plan as well. Why include the pharmacist? If there is a question on medications, the pharmacist would be a good contact. If the consumer uses special equipment that would be needed in an emergency, such as a wheelchair or oxygen, make sure the plan has that information. You can click on the action plan on this page to see an example of what medical information to include. Some consumers may know what treatment they want or do not want in the event of a medical emergency, or if they become unable to make their own medical decisions. There are legal documents that a consumer or anyone can fill out before they become seriously ill that will tell others what type of care they'd like to receive. These are called advanced directives, written instructions that explain a person's wishes regarding medical decisions that must be made in the event they become unable to make decisions for themselves. Advanced directives make sure a consumer's wishes are known and followed. Only a consumer can make, change, or cancel advanced directives. Advanced directives take effect only when the consumer asks another person to make decisions or becomes unable to make decisions themselves. There are several types of advanced directives. There are living wills. There are power of attorney or durable power of attorney, known as POA or DPOA. There is also a do not resuscitate, or DNR. There is also a document called HOLST. Next, you'll learn about each type. A living will is a legal document that expresses how much a person wants done to sustain life if that person can no longer make decisions for themselves. It includes information on whether to use respirators, feeding tubes, and intravenous, or IV, fluids. A living will is written for doctors and healthcare professionals. Living wills are used only when a doctor is overseeing a person's care. Power of attorney, or POA, is someone who makes medical decisions for a person. Usually, a consumer's POA would be a family member or close friend. The POA may have information about what a consumer does or does not want. A POA ends when the consumer can no longer make their own medical decisions. Durable power of attorney, or DPOA, is similar to a POA. The difference is that a DPOA may remain in place if the consumer can no longer make medical decisions. DNR is short for Do Not Resuscitate. A DNR is a legal document. If a consumer has a DNR in effect, it means that the consumer does not want to have cardiopulmonary resuscitation, or CPR, if their heart stops or if they stop breathing. Another common advance directive is the POLST. POLST stands for Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. It's written by a physician, usually for someone in the last stages of a life-threatening illness. It lists what a consumer wants regarding life-sustaining treatment. If a consumer has any type of advance directive, make sure you know where to find it. In the event of a medical emergency, you will need to give it to emergency medical personnel. It must be the original document, not a copy. An HCA does not ever act on what's written in a consumer's advance directives. The HCA's role is to give the document to medical personnel. You must call 911 if a consumer has a life-threatening emergency, even if you know the consumer has a DNR or POLST in effect. Provide the advance directives to the emergency responders when they arrive, or tell the emergency responders where the advance directives are located. If you are an agency provider, check with your employer to learn if you have additional steps to follow after calling 911 and providing the advance directives. Some consumers who have fewer than 6 months to live may choose hospice care. Hospice care does not center on treating the disease. It focuses on controlling pain and other symptoms of the disease. Consumers in hospice care will have a special care plan called a hospice care plan. A DNR, POLST, or other advance directive may be part of the care plan. If hospice gets involved in the consumer's care, the HCA must inform the case manager or supervisor. If a consumer receiving hospice care has a medical emergency, follow the hospice care plan to see whom to call in an emergency. It may or may not be 911. If you are an agency provider, check with your employer to learn if you have additional steps to follow. What happens if you find a consumer deceased when you arrive at their home? The answer depends on the consumer and your employer. The first thing to do is to call 911. If the consumer is receiving hospice care, let the 911 operator know that. If you are an agency provider, call 911 and then follow your employer's policy. If the consumer is receiving hospice care, call the hospice or the contact listed in the hospice care plan to report the death after you call 911. As always, contact the case manager or supervisor as well. Remember, if you think the consumer's death was caused by abuse or neglect, make sure you call law enforcement, the medical examiner or coroner, and report to DSHS. The most common type of emergency an HCA will encounter is a medical emergency. Just like any other type of emergency you might encounter, the key is to be prepared. If the consumer has advance directives, know what advance directives the consumer has and where they are, so you can either give them to the emergency responders or tell the emergency responders they exist. If you keep calm, you will be more likely to keep the consumer safe. Let's review the topics covered in this lesson. Read the statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read the statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read the definition, then decide which type of document matches the definition. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read the statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read the statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. In this lesson, you learned that the most common type of emergency an HCA would see is a medical emergency. You learned what some common emergencies are, such as falls, medication interactions, and breathing problems. You learned what to do during an emergency. Call 911, keep the consumer calm and comfortable, report to the case manager or supervisor, and contact the consumer's family or friends. You learned about the different types of advance directive: living wills, power of attorney, DNR, and POST. You learned that your role is to give them to medical personnel. You also learned what to do if the consumer dies. Let's check your knowledge and see what you remember from this module. Read the statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read the statement, then decide if it is true or false. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. Read the statement, then decide which answers apply. If you need more time to complete the activity, make sure to press the pause button before time runs out. In this course, you learned how to keep the consumer and yourself safe during a fire or natural disaster. You learned how to create and use an evacuation and emergency action plan. You learned how to locate a consumer's advance directives and to give them to the appropriate emergency responder. You also learned whom to contact in an emergency. Congratulations! You are now finished with Part 3 of the Orientation and Safety course. The next module, Infection Control, will show you how to prevent the spread of infection. This will keep both you and the consumer safe.